Okay, Gil.
All right.
Here goes nothing.
Yeah. Hi, this is Gilbert Gottfried, and this is Gilbert Gottfried's Amazing Colossal Podcast with my co-host, Frank Santopadre, and this is our special October Patreon episode.
That man is a pro.
See?
Look at that. 72 years in the business.
Yes.
Has taught him a lot. Gil, this gentleman was with us back in 2016, Jim.
Yes.
For his book about the Golden Girls, his terrific Golden Girls book, Golden Girls Forever, an unauthorized look behind the lanai, and he is back. It's Jim Colucci, author, historian, pop culture expert, and bon vivant. His new book is All in the Family, the show that changed television, which he's written for the 50th anniversary. And it's a show Gilbert and I know a lot about.
Well, you should. We all should. It's
so welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
My first question is I always am fascinated when I see an early episodes of any series because they always look so weird. The characters aren't totally different. The way they talk, the dialogue. And what I noticed is Edith wasn't a dingbat when the show started.
That's exactly when you started saying that. I was going to say, if you asked me if anybody changed, it's the one who changed the most is Edith. Jean Stapleton said in interviews that we use in this book about how when she started on the first two pilots and was given the script, when she thought back to Till Death Do Us Part, the British show, and she heard about what that show was like, the show that All in the Family was based on, that wife character was much more acerbic and would kind of have these undercutting responses to the husband. And so she thought the original scripts, maybe that's what Edith was supposed to be. And if you do watch the first episode, the pilot, Edith does undercut Archie by Archie saying, nobody was, I had to be given I wasn't given my job. And then Edith says, no, his uncle gave it to him.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, Jean was having trouble with the idea that she would be just purely biting and sniping at Archie. So she was trying to find a way that she could innocently undercut him. And I think she, as you said, she kind of went more with the innocence as time went on quickly into that first season. And that's how she became the dingbat, because she was no longer trying to deliberately undercut Archie. She was just doing it in her sweet way.
Because I remember when she said that, I remember that uncle line.
Yeah.
It's the one in particular that hit me. And I thought, no, that's not the way Edith should behave.
Yeah, it's different behavior. It was Jean trying to find a character way to do it, but you're right. The line was very different from what would come.
Did Jean know that instinctively? Did she ask Norman? Are you gonna change this character somewhat? Did Norman see it in the two pilots? We should point out there were two pilots.
3, because the third one became the first episode.
The third one, right?
Aired, so yeah,
ABC pilots too.
It was a combination of all of those things. Jean said to Norman in the beginning, what are some hints on playing her? I don't get it. I have to figure. And so she and Norman together, and the rest of the writers, I think, softened Edith and found who she would be pretty early on. But it was an issue from the beginning that Jean was wondering, how do I do this? And looking for a way in that was more soft.
And it's a key decision because her sweetness and her innocence is just the thing to offset Archie.
Exactly. And had she not become sweet and innocent, so many of the episodes we remember the most and love the best would never have been written, because if it were just two characters sniping at each other, there could have been classics of a different sort, I guess, but we wouldn't have cared so much when Edith had a crisis of faith and lost her religion when Beverly LaSalle was murdered.
Right.
We wouldn't have felt for her in the horrible danger she was in that two-parter where she was nearly raped. It was the innocence of the character that brought about so many of the storylines that are most remembered.
I remember an early
Good point.
In the Lost Honeymooners, which were terrible. And
hard to watch.
There were Alice used to say to Ralph, "Oh, shut up." And I thought, that's not Alice. And that's the exact difference I see here. It's like,
Yeah.
no, Edith is not someone who opens her mouth to other people.
True, and it's an evolution, I guess, because Alice, in who she became, the version we know so well with Audrey Meadows, she does though snipe back at Ralph. She does intentionally say things to up him, whereas Edith really doesn't.
Yeah.
So it's even more in that direction where it's just reactive out of pure naivete where we find the humor.
There are so many sitcoms like that where you go and you watch the early seasons and you go, no one is defined.
Yes.
Or you know, I'm watching the early seasons of The Office, the first, which is a show I love, and the first couple of 4 or 5 episodes, Creed doesn't even have any dialogue.
Yeah, right. They only found out what a weirdo he was as as it worked. I say one of the most famous examples is Karen on Will and Grace. In the first few episodes, she's speaking much more in Megan's normal speaking voice, Megan Mullally.
Right.
And Megan had said that she had this instinct that she wanted to just go weird with it, and they were fighting her in the beginning until she just kept doing it, and then they eventually look how they ran with it.
Yeah. And I when I watch early Andy Griffith Show episodes, he's like a dumb hillbilly.
Yeah,
Andy.
it was the leftover character from the record albums.
Yeah.
Yes.
And No Time for Sergeants.
I just watched a special about that on Reels 2 nights ago, and they talked about how Andy in the first batch of episodes was really a comic character and a hayseed, and then they realized that he was much better as the straight man and let all the other people around him be the comic characters. And look how that worked for him, and that straight man formula works for Bob Newhart. I mean, so many people to come.
Yeah. In the early days of this podcast, Gilbert and I were actually brothers. We realized it didn't work.
And we spoke with accents.
We spoke with accents.
Yes.
But
you're not speaking with accents now?
Our personas evolved.
And we'd wear fat suits.
Yeah. Gilbert had an evil twin.
Yes.
As well. Before we get into this, too, and I want to ask you mentioned Till Death Do Us Part, the British version. Gilbert, quickly off the subject, it's Margaret Dumont's birthday and Bela Lugosi's birthday.
Oh, my God. They were born on the same day?
Yeah.
I
don't know if it was the same day, but same date.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So we'll get that out of the way. And it's Margaret Dumont's birthday is appropriate since I think Jim and I met when the Dumont Network was still on the air, didn't we, Jim?
Yes, we were at a Dumont upfront.
It was a Dumont upfront. So Bud Yorkin is the guy that saw Till Death Do Us Part in the UK and reported back to Norman. You've got to see this show.
Yes, he was Norman's production partner, and they were getting into movies.
Yeah,
they had worked together and other stuff, and they made that movie Cold Turkey, which came out in 70 or 69 or 70. And so they were on a track to make movies. And as Norman says, he was being offered a 3-picture deal by United Artists at about the same time that he was trying to beat a dead horse with this All in the Family pilot that ABC had already rejected once and then twice.
Right.
And it was really his dedication to this idea that made him turn away from film. And Bud, being his film partner, had been the one who had been working in the UK, had seen Till Death Do Us Part, had told Norman about it. And Norman, was delighted at it because it reminded him of his own family life. And then, of course, they would both transition into this TV company where Bud would go off and run Sanford and Son, and Norman would be running All in the Family. And they created this empire that the Tandem Communications, this empire that they changed television, and they each kept working both together and independently in it.
Yeah. But I mean, Bud directed a handful of movies.
Yeah.
It's
interesting. Bud directed some of the pilots.
Start the Revolution Without Me.
When you watch Archie Bunker and the writing and Carol O'Connor's performance, it's like, okay, he's a bigoted guy. He's an angry, dumb bigot, hates Jews, blacks, Mexicans, whatever. But he's a lovable, sympathetic character at the same time.
Exactly. And how on earth did they know they could accomplish that? Because that is always a combination of good writing and the charisma of a performer. And when you're writing it, you don't know you're going to have the charisma of the performer. It's just what kismet that Carol is the one who ended up playing the character. And it did confuse America, I think, in the beginning. And Norman would get letters saying, you're making a bigot look lovable. That's terrible. Some people really were scared that he was giving license to bigots by making them look like the hero. And that was something that I think people still debate about today. But you're right, Gil. Boy, did Carol bring a lovability to it that really makes Archie, in a way, the hero of the story.
He's vulnerable. He brings a sadness to it.
Yeah,
you see the man's shortcomings.
You see his shortcomings
under the bluster.
You see that he's just a man scared of change and progress,
Yes.
and he loves his family unit and wishes that the world could stay the same, where he knew how to protect them. And now that the world is changing and he feels like he's losing his footing, that's what enrages him so. And I think we can all identify with that. Even if we're not hateful and we're not conservative, we all feel like the rug's always being pulled out from under us and we just want to protect our families. And I think Carol really conveyed that.
Of course.
And I always thought too, watching that show, people watch it and they go, oh, this is funny. This guy's totally bigoted. And you laugh at him. But were a lot of people watching that going, oh, this guy hates blacks and Jews. He's just like me.
I do think so. Yes. I think that the trick that show pulled off, which is one of the many reasons it would be hard to do the show today, is that I think really young people today think, isn't it terrible how polarized we are in this country? And it is terrible, but they think that's something new. And they don't realize that in 1971, when this show debuted, there was the right and there was the left, and there was a big difference between them, mostly about the Vietnam War, but about other things. And so any show that tackled anything political was going to maybe have half the country hate it. And here's a show that managed to have both sides think that they were the ones being spoken to. The right thought Archie was a hero. The left thought Archie was the fool. And yet this show managed to get them both watching. I don't know how you could do that today.
I also don't know how you could really watch the show and think that Archie was the hero. But that's
how do you listen to Donald Trump and say he's the one who's, what a great guy. He says all those things that nobody dares say. I mean, it's those same people who would think that of Archie. But
the show is completely engineered to make Archie the let's talk about, because we're talking about the brilliance of Carol O'Connor, but what might it have been had Mickey Rooney, who Norman had on the brain?
Norman had Mickey Rooney on the brain, but partly because CBS had him on the brain and wanted Norman to meet with him. And I Norman, having failed twice at getting this show on ABC, although actually this would have been before the ABC pilots, but Norman, having had trouble getting this concept out there, was willing to meet with Mickey Rooney. He didn't have anything against Mickey Rooney, and what a catch to get a movie star. But Mickey Rooney was like, yeah, I want to do a show, but I want to do a show about a blind private eye with a dog. And Norman's, let's not. Let's do the script that I'm talking about, okay? And so Mickey Rooney, not known for sticking to the script, shot himself in the foot.
Didn't he say something to Norman? I think Norman said this when we had him on. Like, Norman, they're going to shoot you dead in the street.
Yes, he did. And, that I don't blame him. Who wouldn't you have thought that?
Of course.
Showing this show, you'd think, oh, my God, people are going to riot. But
Then they also asked Mickey Rooney to be Oscar in The Odd Couple.
Well, what I found in my research, we did our Odd Couple episode, is Gary Marshall wanted no part of Mickey Rooney. And Klugman had played the part on stage.
Yes, and Mickey Rooney was known for driving people crazy and not sticking to the script, as I'm sure you've heard. And there was a Golden Girls story about it, too, where he came on the Golden Girls as a guest star and just was driving them nuts.
What about, and we said this before we turned the mics on, the late, great Gavin MacLeod, who did this show. In fact, the last time you and your husband, Frank, were in the studio with us, I think was the night we recorded Gavin. And this, I can't trust IMDb, but there's something on there, Gilbert, that Gavin MacLeod was asked to audition. I guess the character's name then was Archie Justice.
Right.
He wasn't Archie Bunker yet.
The show was called Justice for All.
Justice for All on ABC.
Justice family. And he wasn't even Archie. He was something else, and it's in the book, and I don't remember what it was. They weren't Archie and Edith. They even had different first names. And
I didn't know
Mike
that.
was named Richard.
Right, I knew.
Yeah, so it really changed. But the way Norman tells it, of course, the way Norman remembers it is two things. He remembers the Mickey Rooney thing, because who would forget that?
Sure.
And he just was so blown away by Carol O'Connor upon their first meeting that from then on in his mind, oh my God, this is the guy. Because he saw that charisma and yet could transform from this really learned, educated man who Carol was into this man with a Queen's accent who could say these terrible things and make them convincing in one, just like this. So Norman was really just from then on taken with Carol, but they did see other people. And so I'm obsessed with the fact that it could have been Gavin MacLeod as Archie Bunker.
Imagine
What
Gavin
a terrible
MacLeod,
miscasting.
Gilbert.
Good.
What a terrible miscasting.
Gavin MacLeod, though, did play Big Chicken.
He played Big
Yes.
Chicken.
Yes.
Hawaii 5-0,
Was not-
where he
was
was
not a
a
bigot.
drug pusher.
He was not
He was a
Bigot
drug
Chicken.
pusher. I guess he was versatile, but when you think about what a different character Murray Slaughter is from Archie
Oh, yeah.
Bunker, and had he got cast as Archie, we would never have had Murray. See, it all works out.
Yeah, and to Gilbert's point, those early Mary Tyler Moore shows, they're a little bit off too.
Yeah.
Lou's way too gruff and angry, and Murray's not Murray yet.
No, he's bitchier.
Yeah,
It was written to be an antagonist character originally, and then they
Right.
changed their minds. But Gavin brought a natural bitchiness to it. I think that they then toned down and found Gavin's lovability.
confirm something
And like
else.
when
Go
you see early Seinfeld episodes,
Yeah.
Kramer is like this zombie who is just wandering around. He wasn't this guy, crazy, energetic guy with wild ideas. He was like this stoned out or psycho guy who wandered the apartment building, it looked like.
Yeah, I mean, writers find the formula, and then it works.
Yeah.
Phyllis in the pilot of the Mary Tyler Moore show. I mean, did it seem like her function would ever to be any kind of friend? She just seemed to
No.
be there to argue with Rhoda.
No,
And you think it all evolves to where
it all evolves. Talk about these two pilots. ABC, Justice for All. The second pilot was called "Those Were the Days," and we'll leave we don't know the truth about the Gavin MacLeod rumor, but please confirm for me that Lucille Ball hated the show when she saw it on CBS and supposedly called it un-American.
I have heard that. Not from Norman. I didn't ask him, but I have heard that.
Please
myself.
ask Norman.
I'm seeing Norman tomorrow. You're giving me an idea for questions. I should jot these down.
Ask Norman to confirm that. So there was an executive at CBS named Robert Wood. Old Man Paley did not like the show either. But
Right.
there was an executive, and there's always an executive. There's always one person that's championing these shows,
Yes,
which has
And-
come up a lot on this show.
Right. Well, when you think about it, here's Robert Wood championing this show. There was a similar case for Seinfeld with
With
one
Rick
executive,
Ludwin.
Rick Ludwin.
Yeah.
There was a similar case for Golden Girls with Brandon Tartikoff and then Warren Littlefield. So it's funny that as you probably have heard people complain on your show many times, networks love to take the safe route and just ape what's successful on another network. And that rarely is the path to success. The path to success is swinging for the fences and coming up with something revolutionary. And so many of the shows that we talk about from 50 years ago were the ones that changed the world back then, and they still are relevant. So these shows need that champion. And with Robert Wood, he was new to CBS.
Mm-hmm.
He really wanted to make his mark. And even though he himself was supposedly more politically conservative than Norman, so it's not like he had an axe to grind politically, but he just saw that this is a platform where we could be doing more than Hee Haw. We could be doing more than all these rural comedies that CBS is showing.
Norman was lucky to find a kindred spirit in Robert Wood.
Yes, right.
And when the show first started, it was a different Michael and Gloria, I think.
Well, the first two pilots had a different Michael and Gloria. And in fact, it was Richard and Gloria.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Norman says is, looking back, is a blessing about having to do the pilot 3 times, is you get to refine your show with each try. If you're smart, you refine your show each time. You don't just throw the same thing out there and hope that it comes out different. Not that he has anything against the actors who played the characters the first 2 times, but he said the miracle was that he got Sally Struthers and Rob Reiner for the 3rd try. He had actually been friends with Carl Reiner for decades and knew Rob from growing up and from doing little things that Rob did. But in 1968, when they made the first pilot, he thought Rob was too young and so didn't seriously consider him. And so it's those couple of extra years really made a difference and made Rob more believable as a college student dating Gloria.
And when Rob showed up to audition, his girlfriend at the time also auditioned for Gloria.
Penny Marshall. And Sally Struthers tells the story about how she shows up for one of the final Gloria auditions, and it was her and Penny and maybe of someone else. And she was thinking, oh God, like, I'm going to get this. First of all, she's great. and she's also dating Rob, and so they have chemistry, and the producers are going to see that. And she's one of the Marshall. She's connected, and so in a way, Sally says that it actually helped her performance because rather than just succumb to nerves, she kind of went the other way with it, which is, screw it, I'm not going to get this. I might as well just relax and do what I want to do. And that, plus the fact that Norman later told her that, look, there are two ways we could have gone with Gloria. If we had cast Penny, she would have been more like Edith in terms of, I think, looks and also the voice. If we had cast you had the round face and the blue eyes, and you looked more like Daddy's Girl. And we thought Daddy's Girl had better comic opportunities. So it was a combination of, you were really good, and here's the direction we decided to go with the character.
Isn't that interesting? And her being a Daddy's Girl gives the show another dimension.
Right. And it gives Archie another point of likability, because again, if it had been, if it had been Penny Marshall and Edith played as harpies, where Edith was more biting and the two of them were always pecking at Dad, that would be Married with Children. That wouldn't be.
I remember there was an episode where Gloria's angry at Archie, and he like tries to playfully box with her, like you do with a little kid.
Oh yeah.
And she says, stop it, I'm not your little girl anymore. And he stops and he goes, don't you ever say that to me again. And it's such a touching moment for Archie.
I haven't thought of that I haven't thought of that in decades.
And I mean, why does he hate Mike so much? It's not just politics, it's Oedipal too. I mean, it's natural. He's the guy who's stooping his little girl and living under his roof. Of course he resents Mike.
Yeah. Gilbert, that's a great memory.
Yeah, it is.
That moment. And here's part of Norman's genius, speaking of the Gloria Archie relationship, is it's as early as episode 6 that we get, when Gloria has the miscarriage, that we get this. We now know, after being shocked by this show for the first 4 or 5 episodes, now we get this beautiful moment, that last scene, where Archie and Gloria, and Archie's sitting on the edge of the bed. You remember, Gilbert?
Yeah.
It's quite beautiful.
It is beautiful, and it's done really quickly. It's not a belabored scene.
Nope.
But it was rewritten several times. There's a story in the book about rewriting it and how they wanted to get it just right. And you can see, actually, there are pages of dialogue where you can see what the dialogue was and what it was changed to be. But that was where the show was really finding itself. And one of the things that, I don't know if it did make the book, but it's interesting. The director complained, because if you actually watch that final scene between Archie and Gloria, there's underscoring music. And the show never did that again. That was one and done. And Carol hated it, and it turns out all the writers hated it because they thought it was gilding the lily. Here were these two actors who could carry this scene beautifully, and you don't need this maudlin music under it. And so you can see how the show's still finding itself. Here's a format thing about underscoring music. Yeah, we tried it, didn't work.
I don't remember.
It's funny because I always bring this up whenever there's a music composer on. And that's that sometimes I'll hear music in a scene and I'll go, okay, I'm supposed to feel sad now. And now I have to feel hopeful. And
as a viewer, I mean, there are times when it works, but as a viewer, it makes me suspect that the writers don't trust themselves or their actors to convey the scene, to convey the emotion. They have to cheat and tell us what we're supposed to feel. Hey, as much as I love Designing Women, when that music swells at the end and Julia's about to launch into a big speech, it's like, kill the music. She can handle this.
I thought of a great example of an emotional moment in a show, also a CBS show, and that's in MASH, when Radar comes into that OR, Gilbert.
Yes.
And drops the bombshell that Henry's plane has been shot down in the Sea of Japan, and it's just the ambient noise, it's just the clatter of and any kind of music would have destroyed it.
Right. And it's so, I mean, look how chilling it is that we still remember it.
Beautifully underplayed.
We trust the actors and trust the words.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't even remember the underscoring in that Archie. I remember he buys her the big stuffed toy. I guess it's a panda.
Yeah.
And he brings it home, and then he's slow to recognize what Edith is saying, that she lost the baby. And his acting, I can get choked up thinking about that scene, and it's just, as you say, just short enough.
Right. And also, when on television before that did they talk about anything having to do with any kind of reproductive function at all? This was brand new that they were doing this. Everything they talked about, they were tackling for the first time, and it's hard to believe that.
Yeah.
Lucy couldn't even say she was pregnant. There was never going to be a miscarriage on screen.
I know.
It's amazing that by 1971.
When it became Archie Bunker's place, and it just seemed like it was one of those shows that just sat there. It didn't seem to have any pacing. It didn't have any life to it when it was Archie Bunker's place.
Yeah, it was. I say about Golden Palace, about Archie Bunker's place, about
Golden
some of the
Palace.
other, maybe After MASH. If I really went,
how do you
back
feel
and
about
watched-
Sanford
Oh,
Arms?
yes.
Sanford Arms. I say that these shows, to be kind, I say they're like bad pizza, where it's like it's still pizza, it's still okay, but it's not what you love about pizza. With all of these shows, if you lose a lot of the other beloved characters, and some of whom are necessary for the chemistry that you liked about the show in the first place. So here, Archie Bunker's place loses not only Mike and Gloria, who had left All in the Family earlier, but now Edith.
Yeah.
Well, that's like a one-legged coffee table. I mean,
It
the four
is.
of them were the strength, and now it's one, and we're supposed. And yes, they surrounded him by other characters, but they were never going to be as strong as the family that we'd grown to see the bonds over 9 years and been through these feelings with them. We're never going to feel that about somebody who's, the biggest concern is that the keg is tapped at the bar. So it's Archie Bunker's places. It's bad pizza.
Well, the
And
entire
yeah, it
dynamic's
always
gone.
just kind of sat there. There was
Yes.
something weird about it. It didn't seem like there was any energy.
Yeah, it's an idea whose time has come, and it's really just coasting on the likability of Carol and our feelings for Archie, but we don't get to explore Archie the way we did when he had his family.
And certainly they had, Martin Balsam in it, who's you can't ask for a better character actor.
And
But
Ann
just-
Mira and
Yeah.
Daniel Bourgeois. They had
Yeah.
good people, but
Good
they
people.
weren't. It's how do you do away with a family that we had fallen in love with over 9 years and then replace them with people that he works with at a bar that he at most has a business relationship with? It's a big loss. It's hard to overcome that.
All the dynamics were gone. The conflicts were gone.
Right.
The love was gone. I don't think we interviewed Norman back in 2017. Maybe it was 2017. I don't get the sense that Norman has any fondness for Archie Bunker's place.
No, he didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
He had to be begged to let them do it because
Yeah.
Norman had left All in the Family after season 8, thinking that All in the Family was ending. In fact, they donated the chairs, Archie and Edith's chairs, to the Smithsonian, saying, "Okay, season 8, we're done." And at the very last minute, Carol, who had been one of the people who had been pushing to end the show, had a change of heart. And he convinced Gene to stay and do a season 9. But Rob and Sally already had plans and they were out of there. So Rob and Sally left, and now it was just Archie and Edith for season 9, which is why they brought in Stephanie, played by Daniel Bourgeois, to give them someone to care for. The irony is the Smithsonian wouldn't give the chairs back. And so that these chairs had been
Hilarious.
these chairs had been bought literally for about $5 each at a thrift shop in 1971 when no one thought this show would be a hit and they wanted everything to look shop worn and terrible. Now these chairs had to be reproduced and these fabrics didn't exist anymore because they were ancient when they were bought. So they had to go to England and have this material loomed for them at a cost of thousands just to do season 9 with the same looking chairs. And so Norman also left after season 8. Season 9 was Carol running the show, and then it transitioned into Archie Bunker's place when Gene wanted to leave.
Those are hard to watch.
And Archie was no longer a biget.
Oh,
they didn't
thank
even
you.
bring it up.
Yes, Gil, that's the other point I was thinking. I knew there was something I wanted to say about Archie Bunker's place, and you just nailed it. One of the Norman says deliberate things that they did with Archie over the 9 years of All in the Family is that he evolved. And so he didn't stay the same bigot that he was in 1971 by 1979. He had been through things with his family where his hatred of things had been tested, where his horizons had been expanded, whether he liked it or not, by having a grandchild, by now raising a Jewish stepdaughter or cousin of Edith's. His horizons had been expanded, even if he fought against it. And so he was a more likable and a little bit more liberal, to use the word, character. And yeah, so then you go into Archie Bunker's place. Well, okay, but now some of the conflict is gone because he is not the bigot he once was.
Yeah. Gilbert and I were talking today about the Reverend Fletcher, whatever,
Yeah.
and all the wonderful character actors that came through. Barnard Hughes in this case, but the Roscoe Lee Browns, the Hector Elizondos. It's a long list, and I want to cherry pick a couple of episodes because I love the format that you picked in putting the book together. You isolated key episodes that were particularly controversial. I can't believe they did this. Are we really going to do that on television?
Right.
The canned syrup, the canned
peaches and heavy syrup.
Peaches and heavy syrup. I'm misspeaking. It is a controversial episode because it takes on Archie's dislike of Catholicism.
Yes, and you know what? I was so interested in this, being a Catholic myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Carol O'Connor was an Irish Catholic, and I asked Norman why they didn't just make Archie Irish Catholic like Norman's, like Carol, so it would match. And Norman's answer makes sense in that they wanted Archie to be. I guess it's a slight to white Protestants because it makes them look bad, maybe if Archie is a white Protestant. But they wanted to not have Archie be identifiably anything, so that he would tarnish any one more vulnerable group. And so I guess Catholics being a little more vulnerable than Protestants, they figured let's make Archie the wasp that he is. But Archie had, as a wasp, has a resentment for Catholics, but I assumed that would be just one of his regular hatreds. And Norman says he didn't actually think that Archie hated Catholics, maybe like he hated other groups, but that he himself hated authority that told him what to do, especially when that authority was not someone that he respected. And so it was, Norman said, particularly about that episode with Barnard Hughes as the priest, he's not necessarily against the priest for being Catholic as much as he is against him for being an authority figure who's going to try to tell him, you owe me money and this is what to do. I thought that was interesting. A slight distinction.
Very. You wonder how often Norman was borrowing from his own father's story.
Yeah.
He had a difficult relationship with his dad.
Yeah. And because I used to say terrible things.
Yeah. I think Norman Lear said his father is the one who said to him, you're the dumbest white guy I ever met.
Yes, that comes straight from his father's mouth, and that's why it's in all three versions of the pilot. There are a few quotes in there. Meathead. His father called him Meathead. That comes straight from his father. His father used to have a terrible phrase for going out for Chinese food that he said, that Archie says. You know, he was directly quoting Herman Lear.
Yes. Gil, what are your memories of seeing this show for the first time and hearing this and hearing this kind of language, or a toilet flushing on a television show for the first time, which is something you get into in the book? Yeah. Do you remember being shocked? Did you watch it with your family, with your parents?
Me or Gil?
Yeah.
Gil.
I'm getting confused.
I'll ask Jim the same question.
Yeah, I would watch it with my family, and I remember in particular they'd always have Archie going to the bathroom, and I remember very vividly my mother laughing at one scene where Edith goes, Archie, where are you? And he goes, I'm in the toilet. And she says, will you be coming out soon? And he goes, why? Are you selling the house?
I love that. That is actually the first toilet moment we have with the whole show. And it was so brilliant. I love that moment.
Yeah. Same question, Jim. Did you watch with your family? Because I did. My parents were kind of progressive and kind of hip, and I was, I think I was 10 or 9 when it came on, and and I remember being shocked when I heard Carol O'Connor speak on variety shows when he spoke as himself on the Sonny and Cher show, and I thought, my God,
erudite. Yeah,
completely. Exactly. Yeah.
I didn't watch with my family the first time around. It premiered when I was a year old. Okay. But my parents were not progressives. They were fuddy-duddies and conservatives, and we always say they were raised by dinosaurs. Their parents were like from Victorian times. So they were very old-fashioned. I remember some of my earliest memories are they would watch the show, and which I was surprised because they're not into television at all, but they did watch this show. There was an armchair in the den that I could hide behind, and they wouldn't know I was there. So I would fake going to bed. I'd be like, okay, going to bed now, and do the fake, like faking walking downstairs thing, and then hide behind the chair and watch. And I'd usually give myself away by laughing and get in trouble. So that's my earliest memory. When it was on in syndication all the time. So after school it would be on. And I do remember when I was like 9 or 10, either the very tail end of the first run or syndication, watching, and my mom would be in the room, and then we would actually talk about some of the issues. I'd say, well, what's that? And she'd, oh, back then this was, the Vietnam War. They felt this way about Black people. And, so it actually did get us talking about stuff. And it's funny because as conservative as they were about some things, they did laugh at Archie. They weren't some of the people who thought he was the hero. They did think he was the ignoramus. Good. But then I'd be like, then why do you think that? Then it would bring up a whole other can of worms.
Sure.
And whatever happened, I mean, I'm sure he's done other stuff since then. But the actor who everyone thinks is
Jefferson.
Mr. Jefferson, and then it's revealed, no, he's just his brother.
Is that Mel Stewart?
That's Mel Stewart. Yeah. Now he's passed away. I knew him most from The Scarecrow and Mrs. King in the 80s.
He's gone.
I'm sure that's not the credit he would have picked for himself. He probably would have picked something better. But he was one of those workman character actors who was everywhere.
Henry Jefferson.
Really, yes.
Yeah.
He played Henry Jefferson.
Yeah, I found it interesting too that I mean, Isabel Sanford had the gig as Louise right off the bat, but there was a little difficulty finding George.
Yes, well, actually,
Norman remembered him from Pearlie.
There's an Isabel controversy that came up when I was researching this book that I still cannot get to the bottom of. But you guys decide what you feel, and I put it in the book as a little. You almost can miss it. You have to see a little side note in the book. Isabel Sanford, the way she remembers this is that she came in the first episode. We see the rest of the Jeffersons other than Lionel because he's in the pilot. It's very early on, and it's Lionel moves into the neighborhood or something like that is the title. It's like the third or fourth episode. And the only other person we see in Lionel's family is Isabel. Now, when we see her in two scenes. She comes over to borrow a mop and bucket from Edith and has some kind of cantankerous talk with Archie where she can kind of size him up and see how sweet Edith is. But she doesn't say who she is. She doesn't say her name. They just are like, you must be the new lady next door, so that she's never introduced. There's another scene where she's on the porch next door sweeping, and Archie sees her and says to Vincent Gardenia, who at that point was not playing Frank Lorenzo, was playing the guy who was selling the house.
Third party played on the series.
I played 3 different roles. This is his first one. And so Archie is, getting mad at Vincent Gardenia. You sold to blacks? And so that's when Isabel from the porch just waves and says, howdy, neighbor. Now, Vincent Gardenia refers to her in that scene as Mrs. Jefferson, okay? But is she really Mrs. Jefferson? Is he just assuming she's Mrs. Jefferson because she's sweeping the Jefferson's house? The reason I say that is because the way Isabel remembers it is that in that first episode, she says she was playing Louise's sister. And she says when she was called the next time, when they were introducing Louise definitely and calling her Louise by name, she was called to come in, and she said to them, wait a minute, I just was on your show. How am I going to be Louise if I was just Louise's sister? And she claims that the director, John Rich, said to her, just do it. Nobody will care. Nobody will notice. And so she made sure she let them know before she came in and wasted their time and got them mad at her. I was just there playing Louise's sister. Now, Norman doesn't remember any of that. He thinks she was just there playing Louise the whole time. So take a look at that first episode where, he said, hi, Mrs. Jefferson. Is she Mrs. Jefferson Louise, or is she Louise's twin sister?
That's interesting.
And he just assumes she's Mrs. Jefferson.
There's a Wheezy controversy, Gilbert.
Breaking Wheezy news.
A Wheezy scandal.
And when they did the spinoff with the Jeffersons, it's funny because George Jefferson also, he's a loudmouth, but you also see he's kind of a fool.
Yes.
So he's
and a bigot.
Yes, because he hates the interracial couple.
That's right.
One thing about George is he hates the interracial couple, and that's of course bad. But all of his other hatreds, they're not as bad as Archie's because he's hating on white people, and it's white people kind of deserve it in some cases. I mean, especially how he's been treated in his life. So I never watched the show getting as nervous about what George was going to say as I would get nervous about what Archie was going to say, unless George was talking to Tom and Helen, and then I was just like, oh, don't do it.
Hemsley's a genius. I mean, he shows up in that show, and I mean, the show's already clicking.
Yeah.
But he's just a house on fire, and it made him a
Yes.
star.
Yes. Oh, totally. And as you were asking before, yeah, we vamped a little bit. Norman vamped a little bit before he introduced George, because he says that Norman had this great memory for Broadway actors. He would see somebody in a show and 10 years later would want to put them in a sitcom. Like, oh, this guy would be great. I mean, he did that with B. Arthur and Maude.
Right. Did Betty Garrett?
With
Remember
Betty Garrett
from the stage?
Yeah. He had a crush on Betty Garrett.
Yeah.
He more minor characters, who were just playing one-offs, like Rue McClanahan and Vincent Gardenia. All these people he would just remember from the stage. And so the same thing was true with Sherman Hemsley. And the problem is he couldn't find Sherman. And he would, when it was coming time to do George, they couldn't find Sherman. Oh, now we found out he's attached to this show in San Francisco and can't get out. So they vamped and they changed the scripts that we're gonna have George in them and put Henry in them, created a new character, and then later would reveal, oh yeah, Henry was here because it was a trick we were playing on you. George didn't want to set foot in your house, which actually worked.
Yep, very smart.
And one proud moment I have is I did a guest appearance on some show, and on the lot I was walking around, and Sherman Hemsley came up to me and said he was a fan, and I thought, oh my God, George Jefferson is a fan.
How about that? He was also a fan of prog rock. He was a very interesting guy.
Yeah.
Another guy not at all like his character.
Nothing like that character.
Nothing like him. Yeah.
Oh, here's another story I heard. And this was from one of the directors from the Jeffersons. He said it was the lunch break, and the director went out and he was walking back to the studio. And then from a limo, he hears Sherman Hemsley go, "Hey, let me give you a ride back." And when they get in to the car, Sherman Hemsley is like smoking crack in the limo. And he says, "Sherman, we're shooting today. What are you doing?" And Sherman said to him, "I have to kiss her twice in this episode."
Where do you get this stuff, Gottfried?
I would be offended on her behalf. The only thing is, and I do quote it in the book, and she said it in the Archive of American Television interview, so she was open about it, that she was not happy with him being her husband at first, because she was like, okay, I'm on this show. You're giving me my husband. I can't wait to meet this guy. And he walks in and she's like, "That little runt." So she thought she deserved a taller, better looking husband.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, she was so much older than he. They are a mismatch in that way, but they played so well together, you never noticed it.
Great dynamic. Here's a question from a listener, from Ray Garton. Who received the most fan mail at the show, and do we know who received the most hate mail? I'm going to assume it was Norman himself.
The hate mail would probably be Norman. I mean, they all got their share. I know Sally got a ton of fan mail.
Oh, that's nice.
I would say it's probably Sally. No one really gauged that for me, and I didn't talk to Carol and Jean directly, but I would think it's Sally who got the most. They all got a little bit of hate mail. Norman would be the one who got the most, because he would be blamed as the producer. However, they got crazy, like any show. They got crazy mail. How many letters did they get to Miss Carol O'Connor? A lot.
Oh, unbelievable.
People just thought Carol O'Connor. They'd look at the screen, see the name Carol, and write, "Dear Miss Carol O'Connor."
And I remember when they used to show the PSAs that Carol O'Connor did when his son had a terrible drug problem.
Right.
And I think also his son used to hang out with Charles Bronson's son, who also went to a terrible end.
Yeah, Carol, toward the end of his life, Carol was really
very sad.
That was a cause célèbre for him.
Very sad.
To fight drug addiction because he had lost his son.
And I remember seeing Carol O'Connor in a pop-up in a show after that. It might have been Mad About You. And I remember looking at his eyes and thinking, oh, the light is off in the eyes.
Yeah, but that's the Irish. They fade early. I can say that I'm part Irish. They come on after 30, they look like crap.
The poor man went through a trial. Speaking of Carol, here's a question from another listener, Gary Citro. Being a liberal, in fact, more liberal than Rob Reiner, did Carol Connor, if that's possible, did Carol O'Connor ever try to soften his character in any way? And did he ask for script rewrites that we know about? Although you point out in the book that the actors were quite involved in writing and making contributions to the stories and the scripts.
To the point where they would fight, and not the actors among themselves, the actors with Norman. It's funny because they all look back and say how collaborative it was and how great and unusual that is, and that's all true. But they also fought a lot, and there were scripts when Carol said, "I'm not doing this," and not necessarily because it made Archie a bad guy, but because it would be intimidating. There's a story in the book about how the episode, the elevator story, where Archie is trapped in an elevator with a bunch of people, most of whom are ethnic, other than Eileen Brennan. And there's a Puerto Rican couple where she's pregnant and the woman gives birth on the elevator floor. And the concept for the episode is to show a bigot like Archie being so awed by the beauty of birth that he lets go of his feelings for his hatred for Puerto Ricans and for other types of people. And Carol had to play that all on his face because they weren't going to show the gore of a baby being born on an elevator floor. They trained the camera on Carol, and he was very intimidated. And then he pulled it off masterfully, as Norman knew he would. But Carol would fight for script changes. Mm-hmm. He would fight for stories. He would fight against stories. He would fight for political reasons and stage walkouts. And the biggest thing that I thought was interesting, because, Norman and Carol were very open about how they didn't really get along, although they relied on each other to make a great product. And Norman, now being the one with the last word, talks about, I loved Carol. And yes, we fought, but it was all for the better. And, Norman's very classy about it. Norman talks about Carol's process as Archie. And I wonder that, here we're talking about that Carol was this educated guy who was into Irish theater. And then he had to become this cab driver who thought these terrible things. How did he do it? Well, apparently Carol would fight the process every week. So the show would do their table read. Carol would say, I hate this, I hate that, I hate this, I'm not doing it. But he would have to rage and storm against most of the scripts. And then there'd be this weird point, Norman would say, where Carol would go like through the looking glass. And it would be like on day 3 of a 5-day week, where all of a sudden he would just become Archie, and you'd see it, and he'd start holding himself differently. And from then on, he had found it for the week, and he would kind of stay in character as they would then rehearse and then shoot. And so even when they were on breaks and rehearsing and shooting, he would be sitting in the chair. And now when he would be looking on and giving some people some suggestions, as he had the power to do, and I'm glad he did, he would be doing it kind of more from an Archie mindset. Like, I wouldn't say that, she wouldn't say that, but he would kind of morph into Archie by the end of the week. And then the clock would start over the next week. It's interesting.
And I heard that there was at least one episode where Carol and Rob Reiner both hated the script. And they just reworked everything. They rewrote the whole script.
Yes. Rob tells that story that basically, and it would, the way everyone tells it, and unfortunately, no one could remember which episode it is, because I would love to have noted it in the book. But as Rob told me, there was a show that they felt the way the show taped, and it's not done that way anymore on most sitcoms, but it was common up until I'd say the 80s. Was that they taped the show twice in front of 2 studio audiences on tape night. Nowadays, you'll get to it. If you go to a sitcom taping, you'll get there at like 5 or 6 o'clock, and they'll keep you there until they
hours.
Do everything a million times. You could be out of there at 2 a.m. if it's not going well. In the old days, they used to do what they called a dress rehearsal show, a dress show, and an air show or a tape show. And so they would do maybe a show at 5 o'clock. And if they didn't get a line right, they wouldn't necessarily go back and redo it again, because they knew they had a second show, they could get it. And so that first audience wouldn't be there that long. It wouldn't be that much longer than the actual show itself. A half-hour show might be 45 minutes. And then they would take a dinner break, and then they'd come back and tape the air show. And that time, if they didn't get everything the first time, they would have to go back and redo things. And that show might go a little longer. But it was a way of keeping an audience from getting fatigued, because you didn't do everything a million times in front of them. You did it, and you had a break where you could work out some things too. So if you saw what was wrong with the line in the dress show, you could, over the dinner break, rework it and try something else. So over that dinner break in this particular week that Rob was talking about, they all came to the conclusion that nothing's working in this show. Nothing in this episode is working. That we don't like the story, we don't like the jokes, we don't like any.
Wow.
And they, over the dinner break, wrote together as a gang a new episode and did it as their air show.
That's a great story.
That's almost impossible to
Unheard
do.
of.
Think about the way sitcoms are put together, for good or for bad, because sometimes it's too much of writing by committee. But the way sitcoms are put together, they brainstorm an idea, they assign it to a writer, the writer goes off and writes an outline, then he has to get it approved by the producers, he writes a draft, that gets approved, it gets rewritten by the room. This all takes 6-8 weeks for every episode. They're working that far out in advance. So then to say, okay, let's, that process that normally takes us 6 or 8 weeks, let's do it in an hour. I mean, that's they pulled it off. Apparently, I wish I knew which episode.
The actor's contributing so much that Mort Lackman, when he won the Emmy, he listed every writer, and he listed the 4 cast members.
Yes, and the cast members are very grateful for that. They remember that because they felt that involved. They were that invested in the show.
That's great.
And then I remember there was an episode that involved, like, they didn't call it that, but the Jewish Defense League.
Oh, that's the Gregory Sierra.
That's the Gregory Sierra episode. Yeah. What a great, they called it the Hebrew Defense Fund or Hebrew Defense League.
Yeah, something like that.
Archie is Branded is the episode.
Archie is Branded. Great episode. First of all, trivia, the Cub Scout in that episode, the Boy Scout, is played by Gene Stapleton's real son, John Putch.
Oh, cool.
And it's an episode about vigilantism. And one of the things that struck me about talking with Norman for this book is that prior to 2016, when I would see episodes of All in the Family on a repeat somewhere, I would chuckle inside and be all smug. Look how far we've come from the hatred of the 1970s. We don't say horrible words like that anymore. And then from the moment Trump was elected, we slid backwards so far that so many of the horrible things that they talked about in the 70s were relevant again. And here's an episode about vigilantism, which, I wouldn't have thought much about before. And then you have the attack on the Capitol and armed people out in the streets here in this country. And you realize, oh my God, that's as relevant now as it was then. I can't believe it. And I was the one who was being naive. And it's a great episode with a shocking ending. And very few sitcoms, I don't want to give away the ending, but there's just a very silent ending, let's say. Very few sitcoms have the nerve to pull that off. A silent, downbeat ending. Most shows try to end in. Yeah, they had the courage, and they knew they had the goods with the story.
So different.
And talk about actors that we missed out on this podcast. Gregory Sierra was terrific.
Would have been great.
I know.
Oh,
yeah, since you passed away in the past year.
Yeah, we lost him recently. But since you brought that up, Gilbert, you gave me an opening. 5 people we have had on this show appeared on All in the Family. Art Matrano.
Oh, yes.
Richard Masur recently. Larry Storch.
Yeah.
Charlotte Ray and the late, great Bill Macy.
Oh, my God. Yes. I'm all greats.
All greats. And hopefully Sally soon.
I remember Larry Storch is the one that he comes across like a playboy that Archie envies. And he's a young guy. He comes across like he's still and then at the end, I think the girl walks out because of something Archie said. And Larry Storch is going, where's her number? And he's taking his glasses out and trying to read it.
Archie Bunker, I thought you were dead, Larry. In that episode.
And Larry Storch still around at age 98.
Norman and Larry are ageless.
Yes, I know.
It's incredible. Well, the 2 guys that work out.
In fact, when we interviewed him, in his apartment, he had the corner of the room, Larry Storch, had these towels on the floor. Yeah. And we asked what those were for. And he said that every day he stands on his head. And he once asked his doctor, should I keep doing that? And the doctor said, you're in your 90s. You might as well.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a certain point where the doctor says you made it this far.
Yeah.
That guy is an inspiration. And so is Norman. And so is Dick Van Dyke. Let's talk about a favorite episode, I'm sure of Gilbert's, but I'm sure of all of us. And that written by the great Bill Dana, who we also tried to get on this show. You had the honor of talking to Bill Dana and interviewing him, and that's Sammy's Visit with Sammy Davis Jr.
Yes, That what a great, I mean,
A lot of people's favorite episode.
Yeah, probably the most famous moment of the show is when Sammy kisses Archie. That episode, as Norman says, they never wanted to on All in the Family go the star cameo route like Here's Lucy would do, where it would be Ginger Rogers is here this week, or as Will and Grace would later do.
Yes.
But and so Norman really resisted having any celebrities on the show, any big celebrities do a cameo. You know, as I said, he tended toward Broadway actors who were more unknowns to the TV audience. But with Sammy, he said, Sammy practically stalked me. Like, he saw the show and was obsessed, and he just would not take no for an answer. And they were friends.
Yeah, they had
and
history.
So then they had a history. And so Norman said, well, you know, then we went back and started thinking backwards. All right, well, Archie's a cab driver, and that means he can have different types of people in his cab. And Sammy could have left something like a briefcase in the cab. And, you know, so it of course created this great catalyst for a racially charged discussion, and also the whole neighborhood going crazy. I just love the whole bits of like the little girl tap dancing.
Oh, the one with the floor
bursting in,
forgot your floor.
Yeah, you forgot your floor. And so it's certainly a moment of mania on Hauser Street. But yeah, that moment, Bill Dana was the one who got to write the script, and you know, I always loved him. I loved Jose Jimenez. I loved
we loved him.
Don Adams. And
tried so hard to get him.
Yeah, he was great to talk to. He was on The Golden Girls, so I interviewed him for that. So he was multi-talented and wrote this great episode of television, which, by the way, he was a little bitter about because due to some administrative snafu on his manager's part, he was not the paperwork was not submitted to nominate him for an Emmy. So he did not get an Emmy.
I saw that
based on someone's screw up. Yeah, based on someone's screw up. But he was still so proud of that episode. But he has to admit that the moment that is so famous from it, where Sammy kisses Archie, was improvised on the floor by Sammy and Carol and the director. They worked something out where they had that idea, and they called over to Norman's office, and Norman would be coming by every day to see what they're working on anyway, how they're progressing and staging the week's episode. And they said, Norman, we want to show you something. And of course, Norman knew that's genius. And the audience went crazy when they did it.
Yeah.
And I remember it's got one of my favorite lines where Archie says to Sammy Davis Jr., he goes, you know, I know you had no choice in being colored, but what made you turn Jew?
And Mr. Davis, do you take cream and sugar in your eye?
In your eye. That was in the script. They were so proud of that. But yes, and again, who else could be lovable about using an expression like turn Jew? You know, it's like that's magic that Carol has, that he could make that, you know, funny, that we laugh at how wrong it is, but it's still that we still love him for saying it.
Yeah, you know, we talked before about how certain shows don't have their footing yet in the early going, and then great shows also have a peak. You know, that show is that is clicking on all cylinders.
It is. That's when, and a lot of times when I write these books about shows, that's one of the questions I ask everyone. When did you know that the show had hit its peak, that it had really found everything? And everybody usually has an idea like this is the one where we got that big guest star and they were willing to do the show, or where all the characters worked together so well, or Sammy would be one of them. Now, and when we talked about Archie too evolving, I think one of the interesting things about, and it happened after Sammy, there's a moment in an episode called Lionel's Engagement where we first meet the Willises, although they're played by different people.
Right.
They're played by different actors. And so we see all of the Jeffersons, including Mama Jefferson, whom I adored, and at this engagement party. And there's a moment, and they kind of repeated this, kind of stole this moment again for the Jeffersons pilot. But there's a moment in the Lionel's Engagement episode where George says about the Willises, you know that when they fight, he's going to call her, and then he uses the N-word, but he says it fully. And this is, you know, here's a show on television saying that word, which you don't do anymore. Yeah. And Archie's response is, listen to that, Edith. Even I don't say that no more. Yeah. And it's like, wow, okay, look, some growth on Archie's part. Look at that, Archie's.
It's a great
judging George for using the N-word.
That's one of my favorite scenes. And I was just about to mention that scene because, Archie says, even I haven't said that in 3 years.
Yeah, that's what it was, in 3 years. Yes.
That's great. Gilbert, you have such a photographic memory for this show.
Yes, because that was the line. I love it.
Yeah. Mike Herman wants to know, did the cast or Norman have any reaction to Nixon mentioning the show on some of the Nixon tapes?
Oh, Norman wears it as a badge of honor.
Well, he was on Nixon's enemies list, was he not?
He was on his enemies list. Oh, he's so proud of it. I asked him about that. I was like,
God bless
how
him.
do you feel about being on Nixon's enemies list? And he's like, oh my God, what honored.
Yeah. Let's shout out some of these writers, because when you told me on the phone, when you decided to tackle the book, and it's sad with any project like this, 50 years have gone by and so many people are gone. The great Mort Lackman and Mel Tolkien and oh God, I mean Don Nickel and Bernie West. But you found a couple of people. You found a couple of people who were still around.
Yes,
who helped.
Well, in some cases, there were. It was a show where young writers were given a chance, and that's again part of, I think, Norman's generosity.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the writers who did maybe one-offs or were on staff for a short period of time, not the most well-known names we know, but they were in their 20s and they got to write an episode of All in the Family, which then helped them through their career to have that on their resume. Another thing is that Jean Stapleton came to a point where she's so interesting as a person. She's in some ways you would think has a conservative background because she was a Christian Scientist and very religious. And I think she would say in the beginning, maybe sheltered, even though she was an actress and a Broadway actress. And you think that actresses have seen it all, but I think she had just a very quiet, normal life in a theater in Pennsylvania before becoming Edith. Mm-hmm. But then through being Edith and through the outreach of the show and people coming to her and her meeting the world, she became much more educated on particularly women's issues. And so not only did she speak to the women's conference, the one at the Seneca Falls conference, the one, not the 1848 one, the one after, the National Organization of Women, I guess it was, but she also advocated for women writers. And so one of her conditions for doing the show in the later seasons was you need to get some women in here. And so there are some young women who are now older women who I interviewed for the book, who got their start thanks to Jean. So yeah, a lot of 20-somethings who are now 60 or 70-somethings that are still around and had great memories and great stories.
Well, shame on me for not mentioning the women. Mention a couple of them too.
Pat Shea and Harriet Weiss is one that I'm thinking of. I mean,
Irma Kalish was on that
Irma
show.
Irma Kalish passed away a few months ago, and I did speak to her for this book. I called her.
A legend.
Yeah, a legend. I think she was 96 when she passed away, and 96 when I talked to her. And other parts of Norman's world, of course, as other shows, Susan Harris wrote the Maude abortion episode and went on to create Golden Girls. So Linda Bloodworth Thomason and
that's another
Mary
one.
Kay Place got early jobs with Norman. So, he really was ahead of his time in so many ways. As much as if you look at the writing staff of All in the Family and you look at all those names, it's the typical white guy names that you would, you see from that era. So yeah, in the way the show was typical of its era, but Norman was putting people of color on screen where they normally didn't get a chance to be on sitcoms and certainly be heroes of sitcoms or leads of sitcoms. And then behind the scenes was looking for people of color and for women and was giving opportunities to them. So, he was ahead of his time in so many ways.
He's a pioneer. Yeah. I mean, he's been called that 100 times, but it's really abundantly true. Gilbert, as we wind this down with this man of letters, favorite episode off the top of your head? Do you have one?
Wow. I don't know if I have a favorite.
Is it the Sammy episode?
Yeah, the Sammy's a great one. And I love Sammy's reactions to Archie.
He's great. He's a great comedian.
He's like sometimes disgusted, other times totally shocked.
Yeah, and he made it believable. You're right, because he was both disgusted by him being black, but also starstruck at the same time. How do you have both of those things in one person?
Do you have a favorite, Jim? Because I'm going to pull out a couple of lesser known ones for you.
Well, you know what? Any of the episodes that talk about the gays, like judging books by covers. Now, that's season 1, episode 5. And here, in 1971, no one talked about gays or acknowledged they existed. And here's a show that's a brand new show, and they had the balls to have Mike have a friend that Archie makes fun of thinking he's gay. And then, of course, we find out that Archie's macho friend at the bar is really also gay.
I remember that episode.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's what I love about sitcoms in the non-politically correct days, and I'm not all that politically correct in what I laugh at, is that I love sitcoms that were smart enough. I always call it having their cake and eating it too. You do all the gay jokes, and then in the last few minutes, you say, but gays are people too, and they deserve respect. Same thing with any minority. You do all the jokes. You in Golden Girls episode where Rose was dating a little person. You do all the midget jokes that you want for the first 21 minutes, and then for the last 2, you have the guy get the upper hand and have him have the dignity and the respect. And so
I remember the Golden Girls episode where she's going out with a midget.
Yes, and all the jokes where Blanche comes into a room with hors d'oeuvres and just says shrimp and then gets embarrassed and walks out. And you get to do all your little person jokes, but then let him have the upper hand at the end.
And I remember Rose is the old one on Gold. And she comes in.
No, Sophia.
Sophia is the old one.
Sophia is the old one.
Sophia. Sophia walks in and she goes up to someone and says, "Is there a midget in the room?" And they said, "Yes." And she says, "Oh, thank God. I thought I was having a stroke."
But see, that's what I love about that judging books by covers, that Archie gets to do all his gay jokes about gay Roger. Roger
yes. And as you say, so early in the run.
Yes, the 5th episode. Yeah. But you do all the jokes the audience is expecting. You give them what they want in terms of, you don't leave them on tenterhooks about like, is he going to say it? No, you go for it. You do it. You get all the uncomfortable laughs. But then you have the lesson at the end where, Archie's the one who's the fool at the end, even though you got to laugh with him for a while, but at the end you get to laugh at him.
Of course. Ken Feinlieb, who I believe you know, says Jim is a lovely guy, and we agree. Any interesting stories about the famous Shoe episode?
Well, yes, in that
called what's the name of that episode?
Well, there's two different things. You're thinking about the shoe in a sock and a shoe in a sock.
No.
But then there's Shoe Booty.
Is Shin Shibuti the one where Archie and Mike are trapped in the storage room?
In the cellar, yes.
In the cellar?
Trapped in the cellar. And it's about how we learn these formative things about Archie that give depth and explain how he became who he is. And the show only did that late in the run. And so they were still that late into the run able to mine that character and go a little deeper. And that's a favorite of Norman, and it was of Carol, because it gave Carol something really juicy to do, to show not just Archie being funny, but really go deep. So yeah, that's a favorite of a lot of people.
Yeah, you find out that his father locked him in the closet for 7 hours, and you find out that he was kind of an emotionally abused child.
Abused kid, yeah, right. And he's telling Mike, "That's why I'm so hard on you, because it's how my father was on me." Yeah. You really get to learn. The relationship between Archie and Mike makes a lot more sense when you see that.
It was moving.
Yeah.
I remember there's also another line popped up where Archie is there with his brother. And the brother says, "You remember, Dad was crazy." And he goes, "Don't say that about our father." And he says to Archie, "Remember what Dad said when you said you were going to marry Edith?" And Archie makes a disgusted face and says, "He said she was too smart for me."
I want to single out 2 Reiner episodes because I go back and I watch them. By the way, did you rewatch every episode in preparation for the book?
Yes, but particularly, with a book like this, God, you could go on forever, and this would have to be a 600-page encyclopedia that no one could afford. So, for that reason, and also just for getting memories out of Norman, I picked 50, thinking, okay, it's the 50th anniversary, we're going to pick 50. There's so many more I could have picked, but I really watched the hell out of those 50. But yeah, I got addicted. I couldn't stop, and I watched them all.
For me, the show peaks in season 3 and 4. And I'm going to point out 2 season 4 episodes.
I would agree with you, except for I would say, I would be the typical snob who says, the show went on a little too long. Maybe season 9 is true of that, but some of the classics are in season 8.
Yeah, you're right. But I don't know. I have a fondness, and with all these shows, it's the age you were, the place you were in your life. I like
if you were hiding behind an armchair and couldn't really see the screen.
Yeah, there you go. Seasons 2, 3, and 4, and these are 2 Rob Reiner episodes. Games Bunkers Play, where I believe Carol O'Connor was in one of his salary disputes, not in that episode. And it's the episode where the Lorenzos and Lionel and Archie, and Edith and Gloria and Mike play this board game called, I think, Group Therapy.
Yes, yes.
And it's a great episode from the writers because they sort of take the piss now out of the progressive, out of the liberal.
And Norman was always proud of the show doing that. He calls Mike a bullshit liberal. And he says that, and Norman, being modest, calls himself a bullshit liberal. He says, I always try to look like I know what I'm talking about, and I don't. He's very honest.
Right, but here's this show that has mocked Archie and throughout and elevated Mike, and now Mike really gets his comeuppance. You see the House of Cards.
Yeah.
And even Lionel confronts him on being such a knee-jerk liberal. It's really a very smart show. The other one I love is when Edith, excuse me, I'm misspeaking. When Gloria tries on the brunette wig.
Oh yes. And Mike gets really excited because she's like she's upset, a different woman.
And Archie says, "You, buddy, are a weird wolf."
That's pretty early on too.
Yeah. You need a dose of saltpeter in your cornflakes.
And I remember
the dialogue is still in my head.
The one with the games, like Michael is going crazy, going, No, you're supposed to say bad things about them.
Right, cop out and with the two cards that you had to throw down in the game. So the book, A Labor of Love, obviously.
Oh my God! I was actually working on a different book, and I was asked, "Do you want to work on a book with Norman Lear?" And I was like, yeah, sure." I wasn't doing anything. When somebody says you want to, sit with a 99-year-old legend for a while and write a book with him, the answer is yeah.
I think we knew the book you were working on. You don't have to talk about it.
I can say because I'm still working on it. It's also a labor of love, but I have a longer horizon on this one. It's The Love Boat.
He's working on a Love Boat book, Gilbert.
Oh boy,
and we hooked him up with a couple of guests.
Yes, so thank you for that.
So many people to talk about on The Love Boat. Oh, jeez,
literally thousands. And Death took the first cut, so I don't have a lot of them. But there's still hundreds and hundreds that I'm having the pleasure of talking to.
Yeah, I mean that's like a 10-volume set.
I know, and that's the problem with these things. You could go on forever. I gotta cut it off at some point.
So the book is out when? November 2nd officially.
November 2nd,
50th anniversary, and the show is again called All in the Family, the show that changed television. Forward by Jimmy Kimmel, which is a get.
It's a get, and obviously he's a super fan, having recreated All in the Family twice for those live in front of a studio audience specials. And I love that he loves the show like he does.
Before I let you get out of here, and we love that you visited with us again. This is a terrific Patreon episode. Do you have any comments, Matt Martin? Any thoughts on 704 Hauser Street with our friend John Amos?
A noble effort.
Was it 7 episodes or 6 or something?
Yeah, it was a short run, didn't make it. And I know Norman. That one really disappointed Norman that it didn't go longer than it did. But it on paper sounds like I honestly don't remember it because it only aired so few episodes and so long ago. So I can't even comment on whether I like it or think it's artistically successful. I can just say. On paper, it sounds like a good idea.
It borrowed the Family Ties gimmick. The kid was a conservative, and John Amos and the wife were Democrats.
Right, and then also, let's flip the script and have it be a black family living in Archie's house because the neighborhood has changed to a different way, in a different way like that. So, I think on paper it works. I know it was particularly disappointing for Norman,
and I'm sure for John.
Yeah,
I just thought of another great episode. Gil, it's Edith's problem when Edith goes through menopause.
Oh yes.
And she gets the.
And
fan.
Archie says, "I'm going to give you 30 seconds now. Change.
Now change." Really great, really great. You go, you watch it. It doesn't date. It's tackling problems like you say, vigilantism, menopause, miscarriages, gay rights, all kinds of things. And you would think that a show that's 5 decades old, that you would sit down now and look at it and go, well, isn't this quaint?
Yeah.
But that is not the case.
I wondered whether I would feel that way when, for live in front of the studio audience, they recreated the Draft Dodger episode. And Draft Dodger, who even knows what that is if you're young anymore.
That's right.
But it brings up feelings about war and about conservative versus conscientious objector that I think are in our politics now are more relevant than they were maybe 10 years ago. So I think the show has, in a weird way, become more relevant lately.
Yeah, It's an enduring classic. I'm so glad that you sat down with Norman, and you got to meet a hero. You gave us this wonderful book, which is a gift. It's out November 2nd. We're going to put this up, and our love to Frankie.
Thank you.
I assume he's
and to
working
Genevieve and to Dara.
Thank you so much. And, Gilbert still hasn't learned my wife's name. It's been 7 years.
Toodles.
We were in a cab together, right? Genevieve said, "What's my name?" And Gilbert said, "I know your name." And she said, "What is it?" And he went, "Toodles." And I think his second guess was Pickles. He thinks I'm Buddy Sorrell.
Yeah. Hey, you could do worse.
I could.
There was another episode, I think, with William Wyndham. If I'm not mistaken, where it might be with like the guy is not talking to his son.
Yes.
What and then Michael sneaks in and like overhears the guy talking to his son saying, "Come on, I came here to see you. I don't want to be here with these idiots."
I didn't cover the William Wyndham one for the book, and I do remember he was on, but I don't want to.
I do remember that episode.
Character
too.
He was, yeah.
Another good actor, Eugene Roach, who was known to audiences as the Ajax dishwasher.
Yes,
right. And he was the dad in the Draft Dodger episode.
He's in the Draft Dodger episode.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
and
Pinky Peterson.
And your pal Sorrell Book turns up too, Gilbert.
Oh, I love Sorrell Book.
And Theodore Bickel.
Great.
Yeah. It's also a showcase like The Love Boat and like so many of these shows. I watch MASH at night when my wife and I are making dinner to see these character actors. You know, James Cameron showed up, Gil, the other night watching MASH. It's just a parade of these wonderful actors.
Yeah.
You know, the best character actors of the 20th century.
Oh, and Cromwell.
James Cromwell.
James Cromwell.
Yeah.
I spoke to him for the book. He was so proud of playing Stretch Cunningham, and had Carol not come back from that little salary dispute,
I read that
Archie was going to die and Stretch was going to be around a lot more.
Oh,
how about that?
Didn't happen.
And I forgot too. One show that has the funniest lines is when he has to fire the Spanish guy from the crew. From his work crew. And there's one part where, the Spanish guy's very upset and he goes, first Archie says to him, "Here, let me get you something to drink. What do you people like to drink? Pineapple juice?" and then later on, the Spanish guy goes, "Archie, por favor." And he goes, "Yeah, pour some more."
Gilbert, it's amazing to me the details that you've hung on to.
I know the brain cells you've devoted to this. I'm very impressed.
It is a wonderful show. It's an iconic show. It means so much to us, and I'm really glad that you did this, Jim. And that
Thank you. I am too.
That you came to spend some time to us, and we'll push it like crazy. We got to get James Cromwell, by the way, Gilbert.
Oh, absolutely.
I found out in Jim's book that he was purposely channeling a little Art Carney.
Art Carney,
definitely. He was an out and out Norton imitation.
Yeah, to tell you the truth, when I watched the episodes again to research before I talked to Cromwell, I was watching them going, God, this is an out and out steal from Art Carney. And, I hope when I talk to him, he's going to mention Art Carney. And of course he did. That was a huge influence for what he was doing.
To his credit, we got to get him here. Yeah. I look at these actors and so many wonderful ones are gone, like Barnard Hughes and, time marches on. Roscoe Lee Brown, who I mentioned before. Time
twice
marches
on the show.
Twice, and so good. So good both times.
And another great actor who was on there, Charles Durning.
In the
yes, as the cop. Now that's the episode where Gloria is sexually assaulted, and
right.
They bringing up stuff that was never on television before,
and doing it well, doing it gracefully. All right, Gil, we're gonna let this man get back to his life. Please give Norman our love.
I was just trying to cheat on the IMDb and see who William Wyndham played, so we don't leave that up in the air. Yeah, and it's the episode Success Story in season 1. And he's the Archie's old buddy, Eddie Frazier. I remember this now. He was a successful businessman, and Archie was jealous of him. But then, of course, grass is always greener with the relationship with the son.
Right. A wonderful show, and I'll sound like an old cliche, but they don't make them like that anymore.
Yeah, well, I don't think in this case they can't make them like
and
that
they
anymore.
can't, and they can't. James, give Norman our love, please.
Will do.
Give Frank our best, and this was a real treat for us to go down memory lane and remember this show that we all grew up on.
Exactly. Thanks, guys. I had a great time.
Gil, why don't you take us out with a little of the theme song?
Boy, the way Glenn Miller played. Oh, no. Oh, wait.
Yeah, that's it. Songs that made the hit parade.
Songs that made the hit parade. Guys like us, we had it made. Those were the days. And when you were then, girls were girls and men were men. Mister, we could use a man like Herbert Hoover again. G.R.O. LaSalle, grand grade.
He jumped a line, but the hell with it.
This is the Gilbert remix. When does this come out on iTunes? When can I download this?
It's going to be a dance remix.
Guys
on iTunes.
We had it great. Those were the days.
We ruin every show by singing. Thank you, James. Thank you. Thank you, Gilbert.
Thank you.
Thank you, Norman Lear.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for being you, Norman.